Tabadlab session on unlocking the future, designing an inclusive digital vision for emerging economies. My name is Neha Rashid, and I'm the Senior Manager of the Center for Digital Transformation here at Tabadlab, and I'm going to be moderating this session. So we at CDT really think of this session as a kickoff and something that we're calling digital deep dives. The purpose of this is to learn from global experts on how we can shape a forward-thinking digital vision for Pakistan. For a little more context, Pakistan today lags behind a number of its regional and global counterparts in the space of digital transformation. And this is partially related to its lag on indicators such as digital access, internet usage, and of course, financial inclusion. This has hampered the digital potential of the country. However, the story is not all negative. There are many areas in which we're seeing rapid growth in Pakistan. So for example, we have seen that private sector investment in the technology sector has boomed in the last year. We're also seeing that Pakistan is increasingly emerging as a digital talent hub globally. And so to understand better how Pakistan can energize its digital transformation and boost the journey that we're on, and perhaps even create something that is more coherent in this space, we want to learn from people who can explain to us how do you work in low resource environments when there are competing priority agendas? What are current trends in digital transformation across the region that Pakistan really needs to be thinking about and prioritizing now? And finally, how can we think about things like empowering citizens while also increasing our global competitiveness? And so the goal for this session is to start thinking about how we can shift the conversation from IT to digital and prompt a forward-thinking discourse around the concept of digital transformation. The panel that we have today is extremely esteemed. We're very excited to have them with us. First up, we have Anir Chaudhary. Anir Chaudhary is the policy advisor of the Aspire to Innovate program of the ICT division and the cabinet division of the government of Bangladesh, which is supported by the UNDP. In this capacity, he has led the formation of a whole of society innovation ecosystem in Bangladesh through massive technology deployment, extensive capacity development, integrated policy formulation, whole of government institutional reform, and an innovation fund. His work in innovation and public service has developed interesting and replicable models related to government transformation. He is a member of a number of task forces, including the Prime Minister's National Digital Bangladesh Task Force. He is also the chair of several international bodies, including the co-chair of the WEF's Regional Action Group for Digital Transformation and a deputy chairman of WEF's Edison Alliance to Improve Education. Anir has co-founded several software and service companies and nonprofit organizations in both the US and Bangladesh. I'm very excited to have him here with us today. Second, for this conversation, we have Jeff Bain. He is the managing director of the Asia Internet Coalition. Jeff is Singapore-based with more than 25 years of experience at leading multinational corporations such as Visa, Microsoft, Reuters, and the Royal Bank of Canada. He has been based in Singapore for over 24 years, and he's currently the managing director, as I said, of the Asia Internet Coalition, a leading industry body that promotes smart regulatory reforms for the digital economy. So welcome, both of you. Thank you so much for making time to be here with us today.
Thank you, Neha.
So let's just dive into the conversation. So, to start off with, Anir, Bangladesh has kind of done something pretty amazing in the last 20 years or so. And since 2003, it's jumped about 40 positions on the UN e-government index. And we've seen it improve not just in kind of the digital arena, but also the human development arena. And so I guess the first question for you is, especially as we think about the fact that Bangladesh has had one digital vision agenda through to 2021, and you have now formulated another kind of Bangladesh agenda for 2041. How does one set goals for digital transformation from a country perspective? And is the goal really digital transformation in and of itself, or is it something broader than that?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction, and also I'm very excited to be here. A few things that I'll talk about from the question that you asked. I think it really, I would say that there are probably two big things that are tied to the digital transformation that happened in Bangladesh. One is really the political will from the highest level. So when our Honorable Prime Minister in 2008 in her election manifesto, just before the election, announced the vision for a digital Bangladesh tied to the aspiration to become a middle income country. So that's where economic aspiration and digital transformation were actually joined at the hips. That's when it happened first. And as you talked about how in the UN DESA's eGov index, Bangladesh actually has grown. So in 2012, I remember we were near 150. Now we are at 119. We actually slipped by 4 points between 2018 and 2020. We'll see how we fare in 2022. But the whole focus has been on transforming the entire economy, transforming the entire society, and the political will actually propelled us to have that economic aspiration and digital transformation going side by side. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that it has been a bottom-up and an inclusive approach. So when we started, you talked about the Aspire to Innovate program, the program that I've been running for the last 15 years or so, from the Prime Minister's office and now from the Cabinet office and the ICT Ministry. The program really focused on, with the guidance of the Honorable ICT Advisor to the Prime Minister and the guidance of the Prime Minister herself, to do a bottom-up development. So when we started the program in 2007, we looked at how to bridge the digital divide. So we looked at the country's internet penetration. It was less than 1% at that time. Now it's about 65%. We looked at access to power. It was around 35% around the country. Now it's close to 100%. So these are some of the things that we focused on. So to focus on the countryside, focus on the villages, focus on the what we call the union council. So these are the lowest tier of local government. And we made sure that access was possible from those locations. So internet access, electricity access, development of human skills, and combination of the political will from the very top and the focus of development, digital transformation, economic empowerment from the very bottom, and the very top political will, the very bottom focus of development. I think that really gave us the magical transformation that we've had. And alongside this, we have seen economic transformation as well. So in 2007, I think our per capita, GDP per capita was probably around 500 or so. Right now it's over 2,500. So it's grown 5 times along this period. Within the government, we actually created an innovation team in every ministry and every directorate. And there is a chief innovation officer in every ministry, an innovation officer in every agency of the government. So they work together, supported and guided by the cabinet. So it's a combination of all these things that have made the transformation happen. Neha, back to you.
No, that's fantastic and really appreciate it. I guess, I think the way that Bangladesh has managed to bump up its economic indicators in line with the digital transformation is really fascinating. And it does lead to a question of, what was the chicken and what was the egg? Was one perhaps driving the other? But I guess one thing that I would come back to is, in those initial days, how did you pick up what you wanted to focus on? So you mentioned that there were issues like bridging the digital divide. And was that kind of your first focus area? Because, like we said, you have to pick and choose your battles, especially early on when you're trying to prove proof of concept. And so I'd love to hear more about that journey and how have the goals changed now? Because Bangladesh has kind of done great work in addressing that digital divide. So is it still the same goals, or are they different goals now that you guys are looking at?
Different goals, I think, because we have made some progress. I think significant progress. So when we started, we had to work both on the demand side and on the supply side. So on the demand side, as I mentioned, connectivity, developing capacity at the lowest level of local government and the citizens. The 4,500, what we call the digital centers that we created within a span of 4 years. We launched them countrywide by 2010. And these are internet connected centers hosted in local government offices, but run by entrepreneurs, local entrepreneurs. So essentially, it's a very unique public-private partnership where services from the government are sold through digital means, by entrepreneurs at the local level. And these entrepreneurs form the bridge between analog citizens who don't have access to internet, who don't have access to these digital services because they may not be able to afford it, or maybe they don't have the capacity or the connectivity. So they come to these centers and buy services, government services from entrepreneurs. So very unique model, and that made a huge difference. And we measure this progress by something we call TCV, reducing time, cost, and visits. So TCV. So every service from the government is benchmarked in terms of how much time and how much cost and how many visits are required to access that service, to get that service. And the whole mantra within the government became reducing TCV. So on the demand side, we worked on connectivity capacity. And on the supply side, we actually worked on developing very interesting policies where ministries and agencies competed to reduce TCV. I mentioned the issue of innovation teams in ministries and departments, and these innovation teams actually competed with each other in a very healthy way. And the cabinet division, which is our head of civil service, they actually provided incentives, monitoring, awards at the end of the year by the prime minister. So all these things actually work together. In terms of how the targets are changing, so the target by 2021, which was the 50th anniversary of the country's birth. The country was born in 1971, as you all know. So 2021, the target was to become a middle-income country, which we have become, and also to establish a digital nation. There is no end to digitalization, but I think we've made significant progress. So we can call ourselves a digital nation, and that was achieved by 2021. Now the target is 2041, and we are calling that by 2041 will become smart and innovative Bangladesh. So what does that really mean? That really means that we will improve all the services, make them more inclusive, make them proactive. In many cases, you still have to apply for services. In most cases, actually. By that time, you may actually get services without applying for it because the government knows that you need those services. Services will become ubiquitous. You don't have to go to a location or maybe to a physical location to get a service. You still have to go to physical locations, such as the digital center. So I think that transformation will happen. Embedding of artificial intelligence in service delivery so that services become a lot more citizen-centric. And I mean, in the last couple of days, we saw how Google is talking about a sentient AI, right? So maybe government will become very empathetic. We ran something called empathy training for 6-7 years within the government, and trained over 30,000 civil servants on that. And the whole focus was on developing more empathy for citizens and ensuring that the service providers within the government understand the hassle and the great pain that citizens have to go through by standing in long lines in the sun and in the rain to get a service. To get a land record, it could take multiple visits to the land office, which was in the district headquarters, 64 district headquarters. So 50 kilometers of journey, maybe 100 kilometers journey from the remote areas. So right now they can go to one of these digital centers or from the comfort of their home if they have internet connectivity and apply for a land record, and that comes to you by post. So massive transformation has happened. But 2041 is an innovative civil service, high-income country. So it's tagged with the aspiration to become a high-income country. What high income means in 2041, we're still trying to define that. Is it $12,500? Is dollar going to be the benchmark? We're also deciding or discussing that. Or is it going to be crypto? We don't know. So high income country, Bangladesh will also probably become a donor country. Since the early days of 71, we had about 88% of the economy actually ran on foreign donations. Right now it's 4%. So that transformation happened, and in future, in the next 5 to 10 years, we'll actually become a donor country. And by 2041, the aspiration is to become a high-income country with the rights, responsibilities, and roles for becoming a high-income country.
Thank you, Anir. I mean, I think there's a lot from that Pakistan could learn, and just, there are a lot of those aspirations that I think we as an economy also have. Jeff, kind of moving to you. I mean, I know you've worked across a number of Asian countries, and Anir just articulated a bit of what Bangladesh's journey has been. But I'd love to hear from you, looking across the various contexts that you've worked in, what are current discourse trends and digital transformation models that you think need to be integrated into the conversation? And what kind of issue areas do we need to be considering, particularly in a broader Asian context?
Thanks, Neha. And Anir, thank you very much for that overview of Bangladesh. I've been to Bangladesh many times. It's a country very dear to my heart, wonderful place. And I think technology has a great opportunity to play in places like Bangladesh. I think really so we've been working all across Asia on a lot of technology issues. And when I think back for the last 3 to 4 years, obviously with COVID, we've been very focused on COVID related issues, but we've also seen a lot of governments looking at things around data privacy, cybersecurity, and that's to comply with GDPR, but it's also, things we've seen a huge uptick in policy kind of regulatory, governments looking at how can we do this and that. And I think that that's something that we've seen a lot more of in the last couple of years. To give you an example, in 2018, we did 18 formal government consultations. These are like basically governments will say, hey, we're looking at these kind of regulatory issues. What do you think from an industry perspective? And in 2018, we did 18 of them. In 2021, we did over 80 of them. And that's a huge, huge uptick. So we've seen a lot more interest from governments to look at the regulatory environment that they're involved with. But yeah, I think with respect to digital transformation, almost all governments in this region have ambitious plans. They want to leverage technology to basically empower their people, grow their economy. And what we do at the Asia Internet Coalition, AIC, is we try to promote policies that will help them to actually leverage the best parts of technology without kind of, damaging the potential for innovation or freedom of expression and things like that. So I think that's one of the key things that we've been looking at. But definitely in ASEAN and Asia in general, we've seen a huge push in the areas of data privacy, cybersecurity, and also online harms and content-related issues. So that's kind of the big issues that we've seen lately.
No, that's really fascinating. And I think, Pakistan is on a very similar journey where we're in the midst of articulating still our data privacy laws. What is interesting to me, though, is that you notice this trend where there's a lot of focus on kind of private data. But if you even look at the European example, they kind of have an Open Data Act now. They're talking about kind of protecting data in the public sphere as well. And it's funny because I'm not sure that the conversation has moved there yet. But it's very interesting that we're kind of focused on that. I think just this concept of harm and trust and safety is so integral to conversations about trying to get people online and kind of embedded in the digital economy. And I think that's where some of what Anir was talking about, just in terms of, leading with empathy, really comes in, because it's about being empathetic towards the needs of the people that we're trying to reach with kind of our digital transitions. But I mean, one of the things that we come up against, and this is particularly because we are called the Center for Digital Transformation, is how realistic is digital transformation really? Is it like a buzzword that is distracting from core country agendas? And how do we balance kind of this desire to leapfrog and get involved with more advanced technologies when, at the same time, we just have core issues of connectivity, infrastructure, regulation? So this question is to both of you, and Anir, maybe we can start with you and then go to Jeff.
No, I think Bangladesh is a living proof that digital transformation is not a buzzword. It took a lot of people by surprise when the Prime Minister in her election manifesto. She was not the prime minister when she announced it. She was just a candidate for being a prime minister. But that took most of the country by surprise. But the first-time voters took this as an invitation to develop the country. So the people who were 18 and 19 and 20 years old at that time, they felt that building a digital nation is exciting, and becoming a middle-income country while building that is also doubly exciting. So I think they took that challenge. Within the government, we had a lot of cynicism. Within civil society, we had a lot of cynicism. Private sector also had a lot of cynicism. It was the young people who said that let's go build it. I think that was quite interesting. And what we tried to do in the beginning was to do a lot of capacity development workshops to say to different ministries, let's go build small things. So let's identify what are called quick wins. So things that we can grasp, but that has to be citizen-centric. So let's take one example. We went to the Minister of Industry and identified sugar mills as a way to just show a demonstration of how technology can change things. And the sugar mills decided that they would change the procurement process from paper-based to SMS-based. So essentially, since 1932, almost 100 years ago, 90 years ago, since then, we were actually getting procurement slips to the sugarcane farmers, and they would bring their sugar canes. So we said that, okay, why not just change that to an SMS, and let's send SMS text messages to the sugarcane farmers. We didn't even know if all the sugarcane farmers had phone numbers, but we collected all the phone numbers, found that 90% had phones, but only a very small fraction understood English, very, very small fraction. And we only had text messaging in English at that time. This was 2009 I'm talking about. But we sent SMS, and then interestingly, we found out that somebody in the household or in the next household could read that text message. So a third grader or a fifth grader could read that. So that was the way to transform, with just $5,000, transform the procurement process in sugar mills from paper to SMS. And then we felt the need that we would have to develop Bangla language text messaging, and that was developed subsequently. And then at one time, we basically said that no phone could be imported into the country without having Bangla language text messaging service. So these were massive transformations. So we actually could dictate to the industry at that time, to the mobile industry, that no phone can be imported. So we actually started a regulation on that. So these are small things that have changed the mindset of the civil service and created confidence that digital transformation is possible. So we're a living proof that things have changed. And it was really driven by a lot of young voters, their ambitions.
Yeah. No, I love that story, especially because it just shows, you can do a lot with a little just by proving use cases and then using that to build momentum and start creating, I guess, for lack of a better term, kind of levers of power over time, which allow you then to create kind of outsized just impact.
So our journey is also an example of how small is beautiful, because those quick wins, those 53 quick wins that we identified in the beginning, actually created a transformative change in thinking within the government that it is possible. Then we built the Padda Bridge, which will be inaugurated in a few days, $2 billion plus. We built that with our own money. Because we could not negotiate with World Bank to get the money. So built it with our. So that transformation was triggered by a lot of these small things that happened within the government.
Yeah, oh, that's fantastic. Jeff, over to you. Like your thoughts about the buzzword of digital transformation.
Sure. I think a lot of governments always have aspirational goals. I have to say, in Asia, in ASEAN especially, if you look at Indonesia, if you look at Thailand, if you look at Vietnam, they all have very aspirational goals. They all have very young populations. The potential for technology for all those countries is so tremendous. And, Industrial Revolution 4.0 in Vietnam, as an example, such a great opportunity to empower the people to actually grow businesses and build businesses, not only in ASEAN, but all across the world. And I look at e-commerce as being one of the greatest success stories for ASEAN, enabling sellers from people to be able to move from traditional businesses to online businesses and sell to people all over the world. I think it's a truly amazing story. There's a lot of a report actually every year called the Economy report that's done by Google, Temasek, and Bain, and they're always upgrading all the results because they're always better than they expected. So I really like to see that. It's a great empowering tool to enable small businesses to be able to grow not only near 5 kilometers from their house, but like from their house to the global marketplace. So I think that's really, really powerful story. I do think that while the aspirational goals of all these big plans is a great thing, you have to have a goal. And I think that by having a goal, you'll at least go somewhere towards that goal. And, in places like Vietnam and Thailand, with Thailand 4.0 or Industrial Revolution 4.0 in Vietnam, they've been very good programs to be able to guide industry and government towards the right goals of setting up the technology, ecosystem to be able to build and grow businesses.
No, I love that. Just example of, in general, I guess e-commerce. It took me a while to figure out. It's someone said to me, which was like, payments are so important because it's something that you do every day, and it's the same thing with commerce going online. It's something that you are doing so often. And so that shift happening really results in usually an ecosystem-wide change if you can kind of, do that well. But I also love what you said about goals right now. You have to have a goal, and you have to articulate that well if you want to get somewhere. So I'd love to hear from, your perspective. If you were to pick up like 2 or 3 goals that emerging economies should keep as their North Star, as their guiding star, what would those be? And then same question to you, Anir.
So I'll go first. Yeah. So the key thing that we do at AIC is we try to promote policies that will not stifle innovation, not stifle economic growth, and basically leverage technology to the best of the capabilities for any country. When you have policies that stifle that growth and innovation, that's really not a good position to be in. So we really try to promote the economic message. That's what we do at AIC. We really try to promote the benefits of technology. So what I would recommend is for governments to take a kind of laissez-faire approach to regulations when it comes to technology, because let technology grow. E-commerce in this region in ASEAN has been tremendously successful. So if you put in policies that stifle that growth, that's not good for SMEs or MSMEs. So really that's what we do. And that's what I would recommend, is have a friendly policy environment that enables people to leverage technology to grow their businesses.
Yeah, and governments hopefully not getting in the way of that, essentially.
Correct.
Anir, what about you? Sorry, same question, which was, if there were 2 or 3 things that you were to pick up.
I think what Jeff said is very important, actually. So ensuring that obviously private sector growth will happen as the market is expanding and digital transformation is enabling that growth. And government should not get in the way of that. But on top of that, government should also enable that, catalyze that growth. I think that's what has happened in Bangladesh. So not only getting in the way, but also facilitating that. So there, what we did was from within government, a lot of public-private partnerships have happened. I talked about the public-private partnership at the very bottom, which is the now 8,000 centers across the country selling government services and private sector services. About 300 different types of services are being sold. I use the word again, sold to citizens by reducing TCV. Citizens don't have to go to faraway locations, and then they actually benefit by buying these services for a very small fee, service fee. So public-private partnership is very important. Jeff talked about the importance of goal setting. He also talked about it. Neha, the goal setting was very key. So our Prime Minister has been a master goal setter for technology, for electricity around the country, for agriculture, food security, for remittance. So goal setting was very, very key. And I think if I have to really talk about it, it's really that goal setting that gave people the energy and the conviction that those goals have to be met. And you can also measure yourself. So whether the goals for last year were met, if they were not met, why were they not met? Do the root cause analysis of that, and if they were met, also find how they were met. What did we do right and what did we do wrong? So I think those were some of the principles that we did. Some of the things that I would also mention here very quickly, Neha, is that in addition to goal setting, some approach, some philosophy actually really helped. So I talked about the public-private partnership as a philosophy, as an approach. I think that really helped. I talked about how we created a sense of entrepreneurship within government. So the private sector entrepreneurship is driven by profit. The public sector entrepreneurship was really driven by this concept of reducing TCV, reducing time, cost, and visit for every service. So that sense of entrepreneurship was really grown within the government by giving a lot of autonomy to experiment with digitization, with simplifying service delivery. We also saw that big bang projects in digitization did not really work as well as the small projects that created the confidence and then scaled up through big projects. So we felt that approach really worked. I talked about the quick win in the sugarcane industry, and that was scaled up to all 200,000 sugarcane farmers the next year. So I think starting small, thinking big, and scaling up fast, I think was really a philosophy that really helped us. And the last thing that I would say is a whole of government approach. So the entire government working together towards one goal, sharing data, which we really saw pay very high dividends during COVID by sharing data across different departments, and then also sometimes sharing data across public and private sector boundaries. So that was really helpful. We developed this syndromic surveillance system during the early months of COVID because we did not have more than one RT-PCR lab in a country of 165 million. So we had to come up with telcos, artificial intelligence using telco data, simplifying that, and tracking through calls of people with symptoms, tracking the disease across the country. And that was the way we shared. We probably broke some privacy laws. We don't have one. We're working on one right now, data privacy. But that's how we share things. So I think those were approaches that really helped us.
Yeah, fantastic. This actually goes to my next question, which was really about, what processes, functions, and bodies do you think need to be in place for successful digital transformation to take place? I know A2I kind of has followed a model where, it's been, I think, fairly centralized in some ways, the digital transformation agenda, and you guys have kind of pushed that forward. But just maybe, Jeff, just to start with you, if you could reflect on how you've seen this work in different contexts, and then Anir, we can talk a little bit more about, Bangladesh's kind of expertise after doing this for many years.
Sure, absolutely. One of the things that we did definitely before COVID was we would engage with governments very directly on setting up data privacy laws, cybersecurity laws. A lot of governments in this region have looked at setting up new laws, and we would always share an industry perspective on how they can actually set up laws and share best practices. As a matter of fact, the last business trip I did before COVID was to Hanoi. We met with the Ministry of Public Security to share best practices on data privacy laws because Vietnam is in the process of setting up a data privacy law. So that's the kind of thing that we do, and that's what we do as an industry basis, is we try to share best practices on setting up rules and regulations that will help governments and countries and people leverage technology to the best of their potential. And that's exactly what we've been doing. So hopefully, we can continue that. Now COVID is kind of waning a little bit. So we'll be getting back out on the road. I think I'm in Bangkok at the end of this month, but it's really the opportunity to engage with government, to share an industry perspective of what government officials should be thinking about when they decide or design policies.
Great. And Anir, over to you.
So you mentioned that it's been centralized execution. Actually, it was centralized guidance, I would say, the way we
Okay.
worked.
Yep.
A2I was conceptualized at the Prime Minister's office,
Mhm.
and it ran there for about 11, that from there, I should say, for about 11 years. And then incubation period was over and was became so big that we actually became part of the cabinet division because we spanned across the entire government and the ICT ministry. So to bring in administrative reform using technologies, that was really needed. So the way I would put it is that it's centralized guidance, decentralized planning, and bottom-up execution. Because
Okay.
as I said, that those one of the initial interventions we did was creating those digital centers.
Yep.
First two in the country and now over 8,000. And these are the centers from where last mile access to services happens. And now we're really talking about judging by how much digital divide we still have in a country like Bangladesh and possibly in any developing country and even developed country.
Yeah.
We're now talking about last person access, not just last mile access, last person access. So we really have a lot of focus on persons with disability, people who actually are completely marginalized because they are in very far-flung areas, the widows who live on a very small social safety net grant from the government, people like that across the entire country that we have left out because they can't come to these digital centers. So what will be their access mechanism? We're trying to figure that out and then coming up with more inclusive digital mechanisms. So as we look at 2041, which is our next target, there are interim targets in between, obviously. So as we look at 2041, we want to be an inclusive, developed country. That was the vision of the father of the nation, Bangabandhu. So he talked about inclusivity, he talked about equitable growth, not just growth where we leave 10% of the country behind, 90% actually enjoy the benefits, or maybe 50% enjoy the benefits. So I think a lot of focus has been on in recent years and in the coming years will be on inclusive growth to make sure that during COVID, we felt that the big subsidies that were announced from the government mostly reached the big businesses, but the small businesses needed it the most. The cottage and the micro and the medium enterprises, small enterprises, they needed it the most, but they were not able to access these subsidies because they did not have a digital footprint. So we have close to 8 million CMSMEs, cottage, micro, small and medium enterprises, but most of them actually were not helped by these subsidies because they don't have digital presence, and we actually created a digital ecosystem for giving out these subsidies. So that basically tells us that we have to work really hard going forward to make sure digital pathway is easily accessible, develop the right capacity, the right tools, the right mechanism for the CMSME. So that's a very deep focus for us right now.
No, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think increasingly there is a concern that as we become more embedded in conversations about, digital economies, et cetera, there is a segment of the population that is going to get left behind, and it's going to get left behind at an increasing rate, and that we're going to be creating new inequalities in a way. And so what I really appreciate about that story is that it just shows you that with each kind of decade of transformation, almost, the goalposts shift. And you kind of have to be thinking about these things in an iterative way and going back and saying, well, what can we continue to do better? Who is kind of, left out of this space, who still needs to be targeted? And I think that's I think it goes back to maybe that philosophy of yours. It's part embedded in the DNA of Bangladesh's kind of digital story, is keeping the individual at the center.
I mean, I'll give you just 1 minute on a story from education. So when we had to close down schools because of COVID in March of 2020, and the schools were closed for like 18 months straight, and then when we opened, it was also partial. So almost another 6 months of partial opening of schools. Almost 2 years of non-school education. So first we thought, okay, internet. So let's put a lot of content on the internet, which we had been doing. So we had a lot of content on the internet, but we realized very quickly that maybe about 20% of our primary school goers have internet access in a reliable and affordable way, and maybe about 35% in the secondary school. So what can we do? Then we quickly repurposed our Parliament TV. We have a Parliament broadcasting and a specific dedicated channel for that. So we repurposed that to become the education TV within a week. And we started broadcasting a lot of content on TV. And then we also looked at radio, which was not very successful because it's very not interactive. But TV was very highly used during the COVID months to distribute educational content. Now we're thinking about combination of education, TV, and the internet, and expanding internet. We just started, not just started, about 9 months ago, we formed a national committee, national task force on blended education, chaired by the education minister. So that committee, that task force is now looking at across all sectors of education, from pre-primary to tertiary, along madrasa. We have a lot of madrasa students, along vocational education, a blended educational model that will serve about 45 million students in our country. So it's a massive work plan that again is tied to the aspiration of becoming a developed country by 2041. But we have a 10-year plan costed out across 7 different ministries, and that's being coordinated from the Ministry of Education with this task force in place.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And it just, I mean, it also goes to just the, question of, there is a broad digital transformation agenda, but then there are also sectoral digital transformation agendas that have to be working in tandem and have to be thought of in tandem. And I think too often we tend to think of these in siloed ways, but that really needs to be thought of in a cohesive manner to help us kind of drive human development forward along with just your digital goals, fundamentally. So we're kind of rapidly coming to an end to our time. And so I guess one parting question, and this is a bit cheeky, but we'd just love to hear your views on this, is that, do you even need to have a digital vision? Do you even need to create a digital vision to create kind of forward-thinking digital transformation? Jeff, perhaps we could hear from you first.
Absolutely. The reality is if you don't have a goal, you're not going to ever reach it. So you have to have a digital transformation plan. I think that technology is moving at a very fast pace. So people and governments have to think and have a plan on how to be able to leverage these skill sets. One of the key issues that we have in ASEAN is skill sets. And that's something that's come up over the last 10 years. Is that we need more skill sets in engineering and cloud engineers and things like that. So I think you have to have a plan, because it's not just like plugging in a computer. It's you have to have skill sets. You have to have, I think Anir just mentioned one of the things that we've focused a lot about is digital literacy, right? Ensuring that people understand how to use technology to the best of their ability. We've done a lot of work on digital literacy in the last couple of years, especially when you look at the online harms things and things like that. So absolutely, you need to have a plan. It's good to have a plan. The one thing about plans, I live in Singapore. The one thing I really liked was when they created the Smart Nation program. It was under the Prime Minister's leadership. And I think to have a plan, you have to have a plan with the right people in place, and to be able to live through that plan and evolve. Nothing's set in stone. I think Anir is talking about Bangladesh 2041. Who knows? That's a long time away, but you have to have a plan. And I think having a plan will guide you to the right direction.
Yeah, and I think that's so critical, right? It's about also having enough flexibility in your plans, especially because between today and tomorrow, who knows where technology is going to be. Maybe Google really will have sentient AI by tomorrow. We still haven't answered those questions. But yeah, Anir, to you.
So I think Jeff already explained. I think having a target is very important. So I'll come to plan in a second. Having a target is very important. I think it was Bruce Lee who said that you have to have a goal, but you don't have to reach it. The goal gives you direction, right? So sometimes it's an aspirational goal, and that propels you towards a certain direction, and you want to get there. You want to get there. So I think it's important to have targets. The plans have to be flexible because context changes. The world is extremely dynamic and volatile, and as we have seen in recent times with the pandemic and now with the Ukraine war. So things things shift within days. We don't even have to. I think things used to shift in years. Now they shift in days, and maybe in future they'll shift in hours. So I think the plan has to be flexible to get to that target. And if you don't reach the target, it's okay. I think you're making measured progress towards the target. I remember in Singapore, I think Jeff stays in Singapore. In Singapore, I remember making a presentation a few years ago on failures. So what were the failures that we recovered from? And one of the failures is to have a rigid plan. So you have a target and a rigid plan, and then you don't achieve a target with a rigid plan because things keep changing. So I think a fixed target but a flexible plan, I think, is important. And as the world evolves, you have to evolve with it. The issue of leadership, I think Jeff also pointed that out, is also very important. It's really, I mean, the machines, even though Google claims to have created sentient beings, I think the man will always be important, even if we reach singularity, technological singularity by 2045, as we're hearing, or maybe sooner. But so man behind the machine is going to be important. We're really trying to serve the people. They are not going away. So the people will have to serve people. So that's where the leadership in the country, political, administrative, and private sector working together, I think is very important. So that partnership is very key. So target setting, a flexible plan, and leadership and facilitating partnership in the country. And those are very important to have. Otherwise, we're not going to get there, whatever there means.
Yes, yes. What I love about that is we've kind of ended at the note where we started, because you mentioned leadership right at the top, and we've come back there. And I think that at the end of the day, it is so critical just to have some sort of guidance, perhaps, as A2I likes to call it, but some sort of centralized guidance and just leadership on these issues, which is driving a digital transformation agenda forward. Just for everyone of us who are living in emerging economies and trying to sort of boost our digital transformation agendas. Well, that brings us almost to the end of our time. I'd like to thank you both so much for giving us kind of your valuable insights. If there are any parting thoughts on some advice that you might have for emerging economies as they start on this pathway of digital transformation, I'd love to hear it. Jeff, perhaps we could start with you.
Absolutely. My recommendation would be to engage with industry. Technology moves so quickly that policymakers, they're smart people and everything like that, but let's engage with industry to ensure that they're not losing the value of innovation and the potential of technology that it has for their economy. So that's my final thought.
Great. And Anir?
Yeah, thank you. I think this has been a fascinating discussion, and thank you for the excellent moderation. And Jeff, thank you for the very important insights for this video.
Done about.
My parting thought would be, I think Pakistan actually, specifically. Yeah. Pakistan has done a wonderful job in digital transformation as well, especially I think recent rise of startups and the funding that you've been able to amass in the last couple of years, actually, through COVID, it skyrocketed. So that was incredible. That was actually admirable. So my parting thought would be to also look at, from a government standpoint, an equitable growth. Because what tends to happen with startups is that startups have skyrocketed growth, and then that leaves anybody other than the few owners behind. So again, an inclusive growth focus, a bottom-up approach of making sure that everybody rises with may not be an equal footing, but at least an equitable footing, I think would be important for Pakistan as you dramatically and rapidly digitize. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both so much. I mean, I think we covered a number of topics here today. We kind of agreed upon, I think, that there is an importance to setting goals and creating a broad digital vision, and still keeping flexibility in those goals. I think both of you spoke about the importance of leadership, of public-private partnerships, of really, of the government making sure that they are facilitating businesses and not restricting them. And at the same time, we talked a lot about principles as well. Really talked about the principles of inclusivity, of making sure that people are not left behind, of the principles of kind of trying to continue to iterate and shift the goalposts as we progress in our digital transformation journeys. And we hope to embed all these lessons for our own digital transformation journey and for the digital transformation journeys of a number of emerging economies. Thank you to our panel once more, and thank you to all of you who have been watching. We look forward to hosting more digital deep dives with you in the future. Good night.
Thanks again.